Okay, let's discuss EQ. EQ is, to me, probably, next to just having an amplifier, the most significant thing that you can really understand and really learn about the bass guitar. The way I like to look at EQ for bass guitar, I like to look at it in 3 bands. Obviously, you can break it down into as many gradients of bands as you like, but I think 3 is manageable, and I think that if you kind of work with me on this, if you understand the 3 bands as I do, you'll be able to make some really quick choices on your amplifier or on your studio desk or on your bass guitar if you have those controls there. To me, the most important EQ control is the mid-range control. It's crucial to the personality of tone. I like to think of the mids as residing in that area from 300 Hertz to 1 kilohertz. You can slide it down a little, you can slide it up a little, but somewhere in there, to me, that's where all the action is. That's where you really kind of find a personality of the instrument. Instruments all speak differently depending on the woods and the pickups and the amplifier you use. They'll just kind of be preponderant in certain places. So it's a sliding scale. But when you find that mid-range that really speaks for your instrument, the thing really starts to breathe and you really feel like you're singing through it. So that area of 300 through 1 kilohertz, whether you boost it or whether you cut it, can make a big difference in the way your notes are perceived and the way they actually read out in the audience or on a recording. On this preamp made by Ashdown, they have a very nice breakdown of EQ. You've got bass, middle, and treble knobs, and you've got some EQ knobs in between those. And this EQ breaks down really nicely in the specific spaces I was talking about. First, we're going to listen to the bass without any EQ at all. Let's work with the mid-range first. As I said, mid-range is the king. That's what we look for. Let's just listen to that. Again, flat. Now let's pull it out. That's when they refer to scooped, the shape of a scoop. Low frequency, okay? That's the power in the floor of the bass guitar. And that area, to me, is most preponderant between 40 Hertz and 250 Hertz. And it's almost, 250 Hertz is almost into that mid-range area I was telling you about. That's where you can fill a room, you can move a dance floor, you can get a booty shaking, or you can just totally ruin the band, okay? Very important to understand how much, when it's appropriate, when you need to abuse that much power, or actually when it's time to duck it down a little bit and maybe keep it out of the way so that the rest of your bass guitar and the rest of your band can kind of come up to where they can be really understood and heard. So my advice with low frequency, depending on where it is, apply it judiciously. Listen to what's happening, make sure the amp's not just breaking up because of it, or if that's the sound you like, please do it. And sometimes just cutting some of that low frequency, which I don't often advise, but sometimes it's necessary. It can be used as a clarifying tool to make your instrument be a little more articulate, to be able to hear the notes a little better, and also to be able to hear the band a little better. This is all up to you and all up to the situations. Sometimes you might find yourself in a live situation where there's a big standing wave and it keeps catching that one low note. Sometimes just a little bit of cut in that area can really help. Okay, now let's listen to the bass end of things. Here's the very lowest notes. I'm going to turn down the output for this. Okay, now let's put it back. Now let's cut it. You can see when you cut it, it makes quite a difference in the clarity. You lose a lot of power, but that's a technique if you turn up the volume and turn down the bass. You can change the whole tonality. Okay, high frequency. High frequency is the percussion and the sibilance of the bass guitar. It's really important for old school and new subgenres of metal. You can't have a metal band or a metal bass player in a band without all that high frequency clanking away. Because the truth of the matter is, and I discovered this at an early age, the bigger and louder those Marshall amps are, the more treble you're going to need to kind of get through there and navigate so people can actually hear the notes you're playing. The oddest thing is that the worse it sounds, the more terrible your tone is because of having too much treble. Once you put all those guitars and cymbals around it, all of a sudden it kind of sits back and does its thing. One of my tips and one of my tricks is to overemphasize that treble, and you have to do it in context with the band playing. You can't just kind of set it up and go, that sounds awful, I'm going with it. You've got to listen to how it kind of reads within everything around you, and it can really help you to kind of, I wouldn't say stand out, but stand in with the band. So these ranges are anywhere from 1 kilohertz on up to 8 to 10 kilohertz. That sounds really high. Usually there's nothing happening in 10 kilohertz for bass guitars. Passive bass guitars, the bolt-on type I've been telling you about, they usually fall off very quickly around 2 kilohertz at the very top. But for some of the bolt-on neck active ones, you'll notice that those high frequencies really sing up there, and you can really get a really kind of a sibilant, percussive top end that doesn't necessarily read as a note, but reads as an attack, just as when you're hitting a snare drum and you hear that rim shot. It's kind of the same thing for a bass guitar. So it's a useful thing to have. Just like all the other EQs I've been telling you about, you can easily cut them, you can lower it down, and you can get that range down for mellower music like reggae. Sometimes it's helpful to do that and bring that down and bring down some mids along with that. And if you're playing something like folk music, for instance, you really don't want to hear all that string noise and sibilance at all. You just want to hear a nice fundamental like it's an upright bass. Okay, this is the treble knob all the way on top. Let's start with the flat. Okay, let's bring the treble end, the bottom end of the treble in with this. Okay, we'll push them both up pretty substantially. As you can see on this bass, it's pretty active in the treble range around 2.6 kilohertz. Let's make it flat again. And let's make it go away. So high frequency, the percussion and sibilance of the bass, be aware of it, a useful tool. When put in the wrong hands though, a very destructive one.